why I love Jesus. I love Jesus more than anything. And I know that sounds pretty extreme, but so be it. I think I'm surrounded by other extreme people here right now. You see, once we fall desperately in love with Jesus, something weirdly wonderful takes place. We crave to be like him. We admire him, we appreciate him, and then ultimately we worship him to the point of learning everything we can about him and from him. We quote him, then we emulate him. We literally imitate him. To emulate someone thoroughly is the greatest act of worship. But here's the rub. While many in Jesus' day wanted to be near him, to touch him, more than a few wanted to kill him. And throughout the last 2 millennia, millions of Jesus' followers have been killed for worshiping and loving Jesus. Why so many love him is not difficult to uncover. We love him, we adore him, because he first loved us. He loves us as no one ever has or can. But why? Why have so many wanted him and his followers dead? It takes an awful lot of hate to wish ill on someone. It takes an audacious hate to want that person dead. One should never be surprised at being hated for one's faith, because Jesus himself told us that we would be. He said, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. And if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, and that is why the world hates you. How many feel that today, that the world hates us? I'm not going to lie, there have been people in my life I really, really, really dislike. However, I have never wished death on even my worst enemies. And I'm no angel. So what about Jesus angered people so much? What did he do to merit that hatred? And what was he like? And dare I say it, how do we become that? Jesus received various criticisms, so I actually started counting them up and categorizing them and finally ranking them, which I know sounds a wee eccentric, even a little scientific, but it has actually revealed something clear to me. To my mind, the criticism Jesus received, the criticism that was heaved at him, came in 3 categories. And I want to focus on those. The first one, Jesus had an annoying habit of mingling with misfits. It's very clear Jesus hung out with the wrong crowd. He mingled with misfits. He hung out at their homes, at the homes of tax collectors and publicans and sinners. And this is no small matter, by the way. It's difficult to see Jesus' actions, though, as anything but noble, because we come from a culture in which caste and class and employment are less of a measure of worth. Iconoclasts and agitators and bank examiners within our culture are often praised in our society. As a result, it's difficult at least from our context, to see Jesus' actions as anything but noble. So for a moment, just for a moment, wrench the criticism out of a first century world and plop it into our 21st century world in which so-called tolerance is the higher value. Jesus would hang out with anyone who welcomed him. But what if that included known racists, Sexists, bigots, sluts, sexual predators, or Antifa anarchists? What if a reformed Nazi met with him for lunch at McDonald's? What if Jesus partied late into the night with some radical feminists or country music fans or academics or with white people? Jesus hung out with anyone who truly wanted to be with him. Anyone, and that's still true. It was a dangerous thing to invite Jesus into your life because he had a way of working into the hearts of his hosts, including corrupt bill collectors like Matthew and Zacchaeus. His love compelled them to transform lives into conscientious business practices or even make complete career changes into ministry. And this is not, by the way, about rich and poor. In my life, I have met greedy poor folk and generous rich folk, and vice versa, and everything in between. When I worked for a bit at the Sligo Church in Tacoma Park, Maryland, we held an evangelistic crusade for the very wealthy, the hated, the so-called 1%. And one of our church members actually funded the crusade, which we turned into a workshop on how to keep one's faith in the business world. I tell you, I've never received such animosity for trying to reach out to a group of people. But I also doubt I've ever seen a more appreciative crowd, the group that came. Because you see, no one ever thinks to reach out to help the very rich, unless one's hand is in their pockets. And they were truly moved. In short, Jesus hung with societal misfits. And when he was done, the people he hung out with moved from societal misfits into extreme societal misfits. That is, they became followers of Jesus. So what about Jesus's actions angered some? Well, by associating with society's dregs, Jesus did more than reach those rejected by their so-called betters. With the skill of a surgeon, Jesus sliced open and exposed the very hollowness, the cynicism, or even the pure vanity of false religion. For individuals who used religion as a stepping stool toward greater influence, Jesus was just a massive stone in their shoe. Have you ever had that? For this, the so-called good people, the respectable people, hated him to death. And to the worst kind of death, by the way. But I've got good news today, folks. Good news. Jesus calls us to take up our cross and follow him. Yay. The next one of the most common criticisms, I kind of brought it together and I'm calling it this: blasphemous claims. So the second most common criticism Jesus received involved blasphemy. In the defense of some, Jesus, he must have seemed radical indeed. Jesus didn't merely claim to be a prophet, although the people's history with prophets isn't exactly good. Scripture is littered with the dead bodies of God's loyal prophets. But Jesus made a far more startling claim. He was, by his own implication, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Speaking to the Jewish leaders and teachers, Jesus declared, "Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad." "You're not even 50 years old," they said to him, "and you have seen Abraham?" "Very truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "before Abraham was, I am." Hardly a surprise, the people picked up stones to kill him. Actually, Jesus wasn't merely claiming to be the Son of God. David made such claims. He was claiming to be the God of Abraham, the God that Abraham interacted with, the God Abraham bartered with over the survival of Sodom. Yeah, that guy. What astonishes me is not that some wanted to kill him for blasphemy, but rather that so many didn't. Those who got to know Jesus absolutely believed his claim, though. The Jesus they saw and intimately got to know is the same one they would declare as Earth's creator. Through him all things were made, John says. And without him nothing was made that has been made. John says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. In other words, we've seen him, and trust us, this guy is God. He's the same guy of whom they would later say contained all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Think about that. These are the people who knew him. The guy they fished with, slept with, ate with, walked with is the same guy of whom they said his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life. Only one of Jesus's intimates abandoned him, ultimately. And I'm not sure he didn't fully grasp who he was before he took his own life. Jesus's followers gave up comfortable, non-controversial lives in order to have their heads cut off, to be boiled in oil, and to be hung upside down. Why? Why? Because they loved Jesus and in turn loved everyone around them so much they couldn't keep their blasted mouths shut. They loved as Jesus loved, and it cost them their lives. And here's the really great news. Jesus calls us to take up our cross and follow him. There's a third category of criticisms that I lumped it in. It's maybe the most common that he received. And I call it this: breaking with tradition. The most controversial aspect of Jesus' life, if you look at the reaction from the crowds, is his willingness to flagrantly break with tradition, with custom, with ritual, and even sometimes the law. And this riled up the locals like nothing else. Without shame and without shyness, Jesus healed on the Sabbath. Over and over again. Sometimes I think he waited for the Sabbath. He touched lepers. He touched their hands, even though there was not much of it left. And he dialogued with women. Whoa. Even half-breed Jewish women. He accepted gifts from hookers. And he harvested grain on the Sabbath. He was always getting in trouble on the Sabbath. He often avoided the traditional fasts. He forgave sins, and he spoke with his own authority. And he even spoke harshly to the high priest, which was against the law. The Bible doesn't tell us, but I think that he might have even waded into the water past his knees on Sabbath. Maybe it's in the message, I don't know. No doubt his friends, many of his friends, wore jewelry, tattoos, drank coffee, and listened to rap and hip-hop, maybe even opera. While the good old-fashioned folks said, why don't your disciples listen to some good old-fashioned rock and heavy metal like the rest of us? When the needs of, by the way, that was for Mike Hebner, so. When the needs of people were at stake, Jesus never shied away from breaking with tradition. As simple as that. One wonders if a new believer were to bring pork chops to the disciples' potluck, whether or not Jesus might be the first one to put one on his plate. Such blatant breaking of tradition, perhaps more than anything else, started the Kill Jesus Committee among the elites and leaders, because elites and leaders love nothing so much as a good committee. Jesus himself said he didn't come to change a single jot or tittle of the law. Not so much as, I would put it this way, as a dotting of the I or a crossing of the T. He never broke with any rule for the sake of breaking with a rule. He simply was following the greatest and second greatest command: to love God and to love one's neighbor. Paul put Jesus' approach to the law this way: whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Got that? By breaking with the impossibly hard customs of the Pharisees, the teachers, the preachers, the priests, and other religious big shots, Jesus did something that none of them did. He kept the law. Really kept the law. By loving others, Jesus exposed the flashy but fake religion of the elites. I've been one of those, and I fear the tendency of being a flashy but fake spiritual show-off is still sometimes embedded in me. It's hard work, though, jumping through the hoops of such a religion. And if you're going to work that hard to look good for others, the last thing you want is to be exposed as a faker. What's the point of being a spiritual show-off if people discover it's all hollow? Jesus asks of his closest followers something very remarkable, more remarkable than anything Moses asked of the Israelites. He asks us to love as he loved us. He said, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Now, I know Jesus said that his yoke was easy and his burden was light, but that is in stark comparison to the impossible demands of an overbearing, overwhelming, better-than-thou religion of the legalists. When you truly love, you have kept the law. And love is the greatest threat to a fake and phony. It's the biggest threat to a hypocrite, especially when you know yourself to be a fake or a phony or a hypocrite. I know from example. It's enough to really dislike the twig who calls you out. But is it enough to want that person dead? Apparently, yes. So they killed Jesus. And they didn't merely kill him. They tortured him, mutilated him, shamed him, and then they killed him. And here's the good news, though, everyone. Jesus calls us to take up our cross and follow him. So by looking at this, Jesus was clearly a man of sorrows and acquainted with criticism. Over and over, they lampooned him for mingling with misfits, for announcing the coming of the one true God, and for loving people more than tradition. So to all those here who are fanatically in love with Jesus, I want to offer three things that we ought to strive for. So here they are. First one, we should mingle with misfits. Maybe some of us are misfits. I know you. You are. And anyone who is interested in the gospel is welcome. Welcome in our church. Welcome in our homes. Anyone who needs the gospel is who we want to reach. Not because we are better than them, but because we're not. Anyone who is a child of God is a potential friend. And that includes the societal misfits. We love all, knowing the world is unkind to those who love all. So let's mingle with the misfits. The second thing that I want to call us to do is to proclaim the radical truth of Jesus. You see, we should declare that Jesus is Lord, that he is King, and he is also God. In a world that wants us to keep our religion to ourselves, let us say it more loudly. We are not ashamed of the power of the gospel, which is our salvation. We are not ashamed of Jesus. Are we fanatics? Yes, in the best sense of the word. We love Jesus as God's Son, knowing that the world is unkind to those who refuse to keep their religion to themselves. So let us proclaim the radical truth of Jesus. He is our God. And then, number 3, let us love as Jesus loves, even if it kills us. That's who Jesus calls us to be. He calls us to love as he loves. He calls us to take up our cross and follow him. So friends, we need to love each other. And in doing so, we will keep the law in its truest sense. People matter more than the rules. People matter more than customs and traditions and cultural norms. We love each other, knowing that the world is unkind to those who offend the powers that be. So friends, let us love like Jesus. Let us love as he loved, and let us love even if it kills us. Let's